By popular demand, I'm breaking down all the differences between Apple's iPads. If you're gonna be using it for art, what do you need? Do you need the power of the Pro? Or can you get away with something a little less expensive? Let's find out. Hello, my name is Brad. I review tech for creative professionals, illustrators, designers, people with latent psychic abilities. A common question I get around these parts is, which iPad should I get? Maybe you're just jumping in, can't really spot the differences, or you want to know, is that refresh rate really worth the extra money on the iPad Pro? Those are the kind of questions I hope to answer today. So let's set the scene. Apple currently sells a lot of iPads. So here's our lineup, top to bottom with prices. iPad Pro comes in two sizes, 12.9 and 11 inches. Spec-wise, they're identical. It's really just the size that's different here. The 11 inch is $799, the 12.9 is $999. Next up, we have the iPad Air, Apple's middle-of-the-line iPad, which starts at $499. Then we go to the iPad Mini, which has the same specs as the Air, but it's a smaller size. Comes in at $399. Then we have the iPad, currently in its 7th generation. This is the entry-level iPad, and it starts at $329. All right, next up, bring in the Apple Pencils. The Apple Pencil 2 works on the newer iPads. Hey. The lower-end iPads are all compatible with the original Apple Pencil. What's up? Keep in mind, the Apple Pencil is an extra accessory. It's not cheap, but I wholeheartedly recommend you pick one up instead of a cheaper third-party stylus.
I don't feel so good.
Exactly, you're laggy, inaccurate, and generally you're a bad person.
Okay, that's a little harsh.
Oh, it gets worse. First of all, the Apple Pencil might be the best drawing stylus you can get anywhere. Wacom makes some really good ones, but hey, those don't work on the iPad. A lot of the styluses that do work on the iPads will promise you a lot, but don't deliver on the basics like accuracy, responsiveness, palm rejection. Don't get me started on palm rejection. Whenever I say that, I get called an Apple fanboy, and I will admit, I do like Apple products, but there's a reason for that. It's because they're good. I've tried a lot of styluses around here that are not good. And when you take that Apple Pencil and pair it with the streamlined drawing apps available for the iPad, it's just overall a fantastic user experience. If you're coming from a laptop/desktop world, it can take a little bit of time to get used to, but if you've never drawn digitally before, you're gonna take to it pretty easily. One thing I will note, be careful of buying used or refurbished iPads. Not all of them are Apple Pencil compatible. Some are, like the older iPad Pros. Anything called an iPad Pro is going to work with an Apple Pencil. The 6th generation iPad that came out in 2018, that will work with the older Apple Pencil, but the older iPad Airs, the older iPad Minis, they do not. So this is your warning. Careful out there, people. You know, this video, it doesn't have a sponsor. That means I get to be the sponsor, and I get to talk a little bit about my online courses. If you're looking to learn Procreate, Adobe Illustrator, Affinity Designer, I've got some project-based tutorials where we start out simple, get more in-depth as we go. You'd be amazed at what you create, all while learning some pretty cool software. Head over to brad.site/learn, link down below. Back to the video. Which of these iPads is best for art? I'm gonna start with the good news. Any one of these iPads is great for art. Almost any drawing or sketching app you're gonna come across in the App Store is gonna run really well, even on the lowest end iPad. I've said this before in other videos, but I really think the entry-level iPad is an incredible value for its price. It's hard to think of anything at that price point anywhere, not just in the iPad world, that is that good. For $429, factoring in the iPad cost and the pencil cost, you aren't just getting a screen that you can draw on, but you're getting a fully functional computer. Well, computer tablet thing. You can find cheaper pen displays out there in the mid $200 to $300 range, but for a little bit more, you can get something that doesn't need to be plugged into a computer. It's totally mobile. Not to mention that the Apple Pencil is one of the best digital drawing pens around. The number of compromises you make by not spending a lot of money are pretty minimal considering the amount of quality you get out of it. I keep talking about this Apple Pencil thing. Let's actually dive into that drawing experience, because the quality of the Apple Pencil is the same on all of these. You're not going to get better pressure control or line quality by getting an iPad Pro over the baseline iPad. It's the same drawing experience across the entire line. The only real difference here between the two Apple Pencils is how they charge. The new one is a lot more convenient. It fits to the side of the iPad and charges up that way, whereas the old one you have to use the adapter or plug it into the bottom of your iPad. So if they're all so good for art, why would you ever want to get the iPad Pro? There are some reasons. So let's break down some of those key features that separate the low-end iPads from those high-end iPads. And let's start with the guts, the processor, the RAM, basically all the things that make your iPad faster and more capable. The more money you spend, the better, the newer, the faster a processor you're going to get. If you're doing a lot of gaming on your iPad, this is something that you're going to notice. For drawing, it's not quite as important. Most drawing apps don't need a killer processor to perform well. One place where processors will help you out, of course, is longevity. The first generation iPad Pro still performs extremely well 4.5 years later because it had a really good processor in it for its time. That 7th gen iPad has a pretty good processor in it, but 2, 3 years, 4 years down the road, you're probably gonna see it slow down a lot more than the iPad Pro will. The next big difference are the screens. All of these iPads have really good screens on it, but the Pros have great screens. So let's go over the differences here. The cheapest iPad doesn't have a laminated screen. There's a bit of a gap between the glass and the screen below it. Does this affect your drawing ability? Well, not really, kinda, maybe a tiny bit. It can affect accuracy if you're looking down at your iPad from an angle. Usually you're right above it, so it's not too bad. It's not horrible. If you jump up a level, you can get a laminated screen on the iPad mini and the iPad Air. Those are nice little upgrades. And this is one of those things that does make your device feel newer and more modern. So if a laminated screen is the big upgrade between the base level and the Air and the Mini, what's the step up from the Air and the Mini to the Pro? That's something that Apple calls a Pro Motion Display, which is a fancy term meaning it jumps from 60 hertz to 100 hertz. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna give you smoother animations and transitions. Now, when I put both iPads side by side and play with them and draw on them, I can definitely tell the difference. Drawing is a little bit smoother, there's a little less pen lag, but if they're not sitting next to each other, I can't really tell the difference. I say this is one of those things where if I have to slow down the camera to tell the difference, then it's not a huge deal. It's not something you absolutely need. You're gonna be able to make great art whether you have ProMotion in your display or not. It's just a nice feature to have. The biggest difference between these iPads for me is the amount of RAM. iPads in general don't have much of it. That means that if you're using an app like Fresco and you hit your upper limit of what you could do, that app might become unstable and crash. Apps like Procreate work around this by putting limits on what you can make. Procreate does this by limiting how many layers you can have in any particular document that you're working on. So let's use a standard comic book size as our example. Comics are usually drawn larger than they are printed. That's how they squeeze all the detail into each and every page. So usually comics are drawn at 11 inches wide by 17 inches high. Now the DPI varies, but let's start with 300. That's a pretty standard print resolution. Plugging in that size at that DPI gives us 11 layers on the iPad, iPad Air, and iPad mini. Since the iPad Pro has more RAM, we plug in the same size there and we can get 27 layers on the iPad Pro. Now I should point out, this is a rather large file size that people are using for posters and comic books and things like that. If you're gonna be working on that level of professional artwork, then I think the iPad Pro is definitely the way to go. It's just gonna handle it better. So which one should you go with? If you're low on cash, one thing to keep in mind is if you get the entry-level iPad or one of the lower end iPads, don't feel like you're getting a bad product. You're not. You're getting a very good drawing tool. Really, the downside of some of those lower end iPads are going to be things like the RAM and how many layers you can get in some of these programs, or how much storage you're gonna get. For example, that 7th gen iPad only comes with 32 gigs of storage, which is going to start to feel pretty small pretty fast. You can upgrade it at the time of purchase, and Apple charges a premium for storage space, of course, but there's no mid-level here. You're either getting 32 gigs at $329 or 128 at $429. Your next option would be to get the Mini or the Air, which starts at 64 gigs of storage but has the same amount of RAM. For a lot of professionals, you're gonna like to be able to jump up to those larger screens you're gonna find on the Pro. That 12.9-inch screen is nice. And I will say that the pencil charging on the latest versions of the iPad Pro also really nice. In general, there are a lot of little improvements here that add up over time. You might not need any of this to make great art, but all these improvements, well taken together, are just nice. Not necessary, just nice. As far as size, which size should you get? That 100% depends on you. I can't answer that question for you. I know people who got the iPad mini absolutely love it. It's so tiny and small and light. And there's some people who love that 12.9-inch Pro. Some people like the middle size. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question for you. That's 100% your decision to make. So I hope that helped. Let me know down below if you have any comments or questions. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.